Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to the Dissenter update for July 28th. This is the podcast that's part of the Dissenter newsletter, supporting the work that the newsletter does every other day throughout the months of the year, covering whistleblowers, freedom of the press, and importantly, government secrecy. And so, if you're getting this on July 28th, thank you for being a subscriber and a supporter. You can go to the dissenter.org if you're not a subscriber, if you're watching this or listening a few days later, and become a subscriber. And get this while the news headlines are fresh in the show and support this independent journalism. If you're not able to contribute month to month, consider donating, chipping in a few dollars to keep this independent journalism alive and well. And we have several headlines for you. And then to get to a main story, which will have overlap with what I covered on Saturday, July 26th, but it was the biggest press freedom story of the past week. And uh, that story involves the horrors that are still unfolding and continue with the complicity of much of the world in Gaza and the impact on journalists in Gaza. But before our main story, the headlines for this show. Prosecutors drop felony charges against two Cincinnati reporters. Prosecutors in Covington, Kentucky dropped felony rioting charges against two reporters for City Beat Cincinnati. That's a alternative weekly. And reporter Madeline Fenning and photography intern Lucas Griffith were both arrested, along with at least 11 others, while reporting on a demonstration against the ICE detention of Ayman Soleiman, who, according to the Associated Press, is a, quote, Egyptian immigrant who worked as a chaplain at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, end quote. He was detained at a routine check-in with ICE officials. The demonstration spilled over onto the Roebling Bridge over the Ohio River and that carries traffic between Ohio and Kentucky. As recounted by the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, Fenning was approached by police from Covington who were dispersing the protest. They arrested her while WVXU reporter Nick Swartzel tried to inform them that Fenning was a member of the press. Next, they arrested Griffith, who had multiple professional cameras. Unfortunately, they still face misdemeanor charges that prosecutors have not dropped. William Sharp, senior staff attorney for the ACLU of Kentucky, who represents them, said, quote, our clients were doing their jobs and should have never been arrested in the first place. A free press is critical to a functioning democracy, and those members of the press who, like our clients, merely cover a story enjoy the full protection of the U.S. and Kentucky constitutions to do so. We look forward to zealously defending them in court. The next story is U.S. Appeals Court upholds Trump White House ban against the AP, the Associated Press's request to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals to reconsider a ruling that allowed President Donald Trump's White House to continue banning them from events was rejected. The ban against the AP was one of the first high-profile incidents involving the press during Trump's second term. He retaliated against them because they won't call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. The Knight First Amendment Institute said that this, quote, effectively allows the White House to continue banning reporters from the press pool in retaliation for their reporting. The organization highlighted the expulsion of the Wall Street Journal from an overseas trip press pool as retaliation for the publication's story about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. This is one of the more recent examples of Trump's attacks on the press. And the Institute added these kinds of viewpoint-based exclusions, this is a quote, undermine press freedom as well as the public's access to reliable information about the president and his policies. Our next story is local Fox News producer in Sacramento is fired. A producer for Fox 40, that's a local Fox News affiliate in Sacramento, was fired after she objected on social media to Fox News correspondent Bill Melugin embedding with masked Border Patrol agents during raids at a Home Depot in the capital city of California. Quote, so grimy. Of course, Border Patrol had a Fox News reporter ride along with them, Bacon wrote. To be targeted for no reason is awful. This country deserves better. And she posted this on the platform formerly known as Twitter. Bacon responded to the firing. Quote, I'm upset that this happened the way it did and that the company is not standing behind me. They're only worried about viewers, as opposed to looking at a high quality employee and what I've done for the company. She had been with the affiliate for a few years. There were no disciplinary issues. Latino GOP political consultant Mike Madrid objected to Fox News and Melusion's involvement in propaganda. Quote, history tells us that once you have a communications infrastructure that is delivering propaganda on behalf of a regime, it has some lasting effects. Indeed, this was the farthest north that Border Patrol agents had gone in California to conduct raids, and Melusian and Fox News helped the Border Patrol justify their aggressive actions against California immigrants. The next story is whistleblower says 1,000 FBI agents combed through Epstein files looking for Trump. A whistleblower came to the United States Congress, according to the New York Times, and informed representatives and senators that 1,000 FBI agents were instructed to flag any records in the files on Jeffrey Epstein that mentioned President Donald Trump. As Senator Dick Durbin characterized it, quote, essentially agents were pulled out of their field from their work combating narcotics and violent crime to review this mountain of documents, end quote. Afraid of votes that could force the Justice Department to disclose Epstein files with Trump's name, Speaker Mike Johnson abruptly ended business in the House and sent lawmakers home for the August recess, hoping that demands for transparency will go away by the time that legislators return. And then finally, the Trump administration released over 240,000 files on Martin Luther King Jr. These materials anticipated along with the release of JFK files. We've seen the release of those. There were the release of the RFK Jr. files. So now we have the Martin Luther King Jr. files, and they include FBI memos, field reports, and information collected from wiretaps. Martin Luther King Jr.'s family objected to the disclosure of material that they described as the, quote, fruits of the FBI's COINTELPRO surveillance that was intended to destroy him as a civil rights leader. I'll read their entire statement because of its importance in contextualizing these files. We recognize that the release of documents concerning the assassination of our father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., has long been a subject of interest, captivating public curiosity for decades. And by the way, this comes from Martin Luther King III and Bernice King. As the children of Dr. King and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, his tragic death has been an intensely personal grief, a devastating loss for his wife, children, and the granddaughter he never met. An absence our family has endured for over 57 years. We ask those who engage with the release of these files to do so with empathy, restraint, and respect for our family's continuing grief. The release of these files must be viewed within their full historical context. During our father's lifetime, he was relentlessly targeted by an invasive, predatory, and deeply disturbing disinformation and surveillance campaign orchestrated by J. Edgar Hoover through the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The intent of the government's COINTELPRO campaign was not only to monitor, but to discredit, dismantle, and destroy Dr. King's reputation in the broader American civil rights movement. These actions were not only invasions of privacy, but intentional assaults on the truth, undermining the dignity and freedoms of private citizens who fought for justice designed to neutralize those who dared to challenge the status quo. In 1999, our family filed a wrongful death civil lawsuit in Shelby County, Tennessee. The jury unanimously concluded that our father was the victim of a conspiracy involving Lloyd Jowers and unnamed co conspirators, including government agencies, as a part of a wider scheme. The verdict also affirmed that someone other than James Earl Ray was the shooter and that Mr. Ray was set up to take the blame. Our family views that verdict as an affirmation of our long held beliefs. As we review these newly released files, we will assess whether they offer additional insights beyond the findings our family has already accepted. While we support transparency and historical accountability, we object to any attacks on our father's legacy or attempts to weaponize it to spread falsehoods. We strongly condemn any attempts to misuse these documents in ways intended to undermine our father's legacy and the significant achievements of the movement. Those who promote the fruit of the FBI's surveillance will unknowingly align themselves with an ongoing campaign to degrade our father and the civil rights movement. Instead of repeating the injustices of the past, we encourage the public to continue the work that our father began, building equity, justice, and peace for all. Now more than ever, we must honor his sacrifice by committing ourselves to the realization of his dream, a society rooted in compassion, unity, and equality. And then there's a little bit more there, but that's the bulk of their statement. And important words for understanding these files. And so far, I don't think there's really any major headlines to come out of the files. The sense is that scholars are going to need some time to go through the files and analyze them and see what new understanding of Dr. King can be gleaned from those files. And if there's anything important from this new transparency, this disclosure of these files, I'll come back to it on this show. And that does it for the headlines. As I said up top, our main story, and let's get to the main story, is what is happening in Gaza. We've covered this before. This isn't the first time that the show has paid attention to the plight of Palestinians in Gaza in the context of freedom of the press in particular. But we've seen some images make it into the US press of how horrifyingly deformed malnutrition has impacted the children in Gaza. We're seeing all of these reports come out of children dying from malnutrition. And along with that, we recognize that the starvation is impacting doctors, nurses, humanitarian aid providers, and then the journalists on the ground, the very few who have been in there independently reporting on what is happening for the last 18, 19 months. And also, several of those journalists named as Hamas agents. So a target put on their back by the Israeli government. And regardless of what they say about the safety of journalists and not wishing to allow international journalists into Gaza because they are afraid that those journalists will be bombed by their own military and killed. The fact of the matter is that those journalists in Gaza have been targeted. Many of them we know from putting together the stories of those strikes were specifically targeted. And if they weren't, they were part of the mass bombing. They were part of the mass casualties that took place. So let's get to this. and also in the context of the media silence. I wrote about the media silence up to this point, how people are speaking with this alarm now. And I don't want that to be any lower in its volume than it is right now. Absolutely, these media organizations should speak up. Any solidarity statements, any efforts to take care of the health and ensure the survival of journalists, in addition to all the other people in Gaza, that is welcome. But these organizations have known for quite some time that this was the trajectory for Gaza, that we were headed towards this point in which we would just start seeing people die off in mass because they do not have access to food and water. And in fact, Israel has waged this terrorization campaign in which people go to the points where aid is available and they are shot. They are basically massacred while they are trying to obtain food and water. And so let's see this clip here of this from the State Department. It's from the State Department spokesperson. This briefing, and there is a reporter in the room who asks about what is unfolding and how dire it is right now in Gaza for the people, including journalists.
I want to ask a question on behalf of journalists in Gaza. You and other spokespeople behind this podium, they always talk about the freedom of expression, the value of our work. Our correspondents, including my own of Al Arabiya and my colleagues of AFP and every other journalist in Gaza, are unable to do their job because they are starving. They don't have food. How can you allow this to happen? And you tell us and tell everybody else that the work of journalists is vital, especially in a war zone. And yet you now saying that it's Hamas who's controlling the food, and therefore we can't do anything about these people.
What I'm saying is Hamas is.
How can you help them? How can you
what
help
I'm saying
journalists
first on
in a
that
war
front,
zone?
in terms of the food, is that Hamas, through looting the food, has led to weaponization. They are weaponizing aid when they are able to. We have a system in place attempting to get as much aid into Gaza as possible in a way where it is not being looted by Hamas. That is the reality that we're seeing. That is the reality that we're pushing for, trying to get as much aid in there as we possibly can. Yes.
All right, so that's the State Department spokesperson. This is the next ghoul that we can get to know during Biden's ghoul, his typical person to trot out and deal with denying the reality of genocide in Gaza was Matthew Miller. And now this is actually the deputy spokesperson. There's another worse person. He is a bit of a minion to the other flack that comes out there and speaks. And this is Tom Pigott. And Tom Pigott is there essentially lying to the press. All those reporters know that this is false. And he's telling them that the reason why nothing can be done for reporters in Gaza is because of the fact that Hamas is looting aid. Now, according to Israeli military officials, this was reported by the New York Times. In fact, this is not true. Hamas has not been systematically stealing aid, or as he used it in his phrase, was looting the aid. They have not been doing that. The biggest supplier of emergency assistance has been the UN, and they have not, according to two senior Israeli military officials and two other Israelis involved in the matter. That's the New York Times' sources. According to them, this is absolutely false. This has not been unfolding at all, though for nearly 2 years, this is what Israel has been saying. And then, of course, that lie has been co-signed by the United States government, various European countries. Now you see the Trump administration pursuing and running with that lie as well to excuse the horrors that we are witnessing. So, with that, I move on to let's actually hear from a journalist on the ground in Gaza. And for this, I will need to give a bit of a narration a translation of this for people who listen to the show. So that's why I'm going to do this over the English subtitles. And this is a video that shows you the AFP journalist. His name is Youssef Hassouna, and he is a journalist that has covered this carnage for the last 21 months.
أنا يوسف حسونة من
I'm
سكان
Yusuf
قطاع غزة
Hassouna, a
السود
resident of the
بمدينة
Gaza Strip,
غزة.
living in Gaza
عمري
City. I
48
am
سنة
48
عندي
years old,
أفراد
and my family
العيلة
consists of
8 وإلي
people.
أخت عندي
I have a
مريضة
sixth
في
sister
قلب
who lives
البيت.
with me.
أنا كالمعاناة
What
اللي
I suffer
بعانيها
from is
صعوبة
mainly
الحصول
related to
على
the
الأكل.
difficulty
كان
of
وزني
accessing
أنا ما
food. I
يعادل
used to weigh around 110
110 كيلو.
kilograms.
حاليا أنا وزني ما
Today I
يعادل
weigh between
65 كيلو
65
أو
and 70
70 كيلو.
kilograms.
طبعا حصولنا على
Obtaining
الأكل
food
في
in
قطاع
Gaza is
غزة
extremely
صعوبة جدا
difficult.
جدا. صعب إنه نحصل على الأكل حتى لو
Even
كان
when it is
موجود بيكون
available,
أسعاره
prices have multiplied a
ضعف في 100.
hundredfold.
مثلا إنه بيكون
For
كان
example, a
كيلو
kilo of
العدس
lentils
حقه
used to
3
cost 3
شيكل اليوم
shekels.
حق الكيلو العدس
Today
80
it costs
شيكل.
80 shekels.
كيلو رز كان
Rice
حقه
used to
7
cost
شيكل
7
اليوم حقه
shekels.
140
Today it
شيكل.
costs
صعوبة
140
حصولنا
shekels.
على
Accessing
المية
water is
نفس
equally
الشيء
difficult,
بالمية الحلوة
whether it is
أو
fresh water or
المية
salt water.
المالحة. إنه بقعد أولادي
Children have to
يصفوا في
queue
الدور ما يعادل 6
for 4,
7
5,
4
6,
ساعات
or
أو
even
5
7
ساعات
hours
لما
to
يجيبوا
collect it.
المية. طبعا أنا
Another difficulty is that I
كمثال
walk
إني
14
بمشي
to
يوميا
15 kilometers
14
every
15
day
كيلو لما بدي
to
أوصل
reach the places
لمكان
where events are
أجيب فيه
happening.
الحدث. يعني اليوم صباحا
This
أنا ما
morning I walked
يعادل
about
مشيت ما
25
يعادل
kilometers round trip
25 كيلو بين رايح جاي وبين هذا عشان أفتش
in search of
على الطرق.
information.
صعب
It's
جدا.
very,
يعني
very
كنت
difficult.
أنا في
I
هذاك
used to
الوقت
change my
بدي
shoes
كل
every 6
أطلب بوت.
months.
اليوم بدي ما يعادل
Today I wear
كل
out a
شهر
pair
أو
every
شهرين
month or 2.
البوت. هذه الصعوبات
These
نواجهها
are the
حاليا.
difficulties
إني
we
أنا
are
لما
facing.
بشتغل
As a
كمصور
journalist, I
صحفي
wear a
بطلع لابس
bulletproof vest,
الدرع هذا الدرع كمان بواجهني
which
مشاكل
also
بين الناس.
causes
في ناس
problems
بتحب
with some
الصحافة
people,
وفي
some
ناس
like
بتخاف من
journalists,
الصحافة.
others do
الناس
not.
اللي بتحب الصحافة
Those who
بتيجي
support
تكلمني
us
تقول
come
لي يا
to say
صاحبي
to
إيش
me,
صار إيش
tell
صار
us what's
فيك.
happening,
كلمني
when will
احكيني
this war
وكل الحرب
end,
حتخلص. ابعت صوتنا
make our
برا
voice heard
ولا العالم
abroad,
كله يا عمي
tell
احنا
the whole
بدناش
world
حرب
what we
بدناش كذا.
that we
وفي
don't want
ناس
war.
نفس الشيء
Others
بيقولوا يا
say the
صاحبي تمشيش
opposite.
جنبنا
Don't come
تركبش
near
جنبنا.
us.
اليهود
As journalists,
بقصفوا
we're
والإسرائيليين
targeted
بقصفوا
by Israeli
الصحافة.
bombing.
وأنا
I
بحب
want to send
بوجه
a
رسالة
message.
إنه يا عمي
We
إحنا
Palestinians
إحنا
want to live in
كفلسطينيين
peace.
بدنا نعيش بسلام. أنا كيوسف
I, Yusuf
حسونة حابب
Hassouna,
نعيش
want to live in
بسلام.
peace.
إحنا ما في إلنا
We have
أي
no
عدو
enemies
ولا
anywhere.
إن أي
I don't
كذا. ليش بصير
understand why
فينا
this is
هيك مش
happening
عارف.
to us.
ليش إنه بصير
Why
فينا
is there a
حرب بيننا
war
وبين
between
إسرائيل.
Israel
خلص
and us?
نتفق
Let's
على
find a
قضية
way to
معينة
establish
ويصير
peace
سلام
and love
بيناتنا
between
ومحبة
us.
بسلام
There are
عشان
no
الحرب
winners in this
فيش
war.
فيها أي جهة انتصار.
And that's Youssef Hassouna, AFP journalist. AFP, Agence France Presse, is one of the news service that actually put their names or their organizations onto a statement, joining with the BBC, joining with Reuters, and joining with the Associated Press to say that they have freelance journalists in Gaza who are dying from starvation and need to be rescued, are having tremendous difficulty functioning while they do their jobs. And those organizations, in my view, waited too long to put their organizations to this statement. But for people like Youssef Hassouna, there's nothing lost from him sharing his story right now. I'm sure he would have shared his story sooner, and probably has been trying to share with the world what it's like to cover Gaza for the past months. We see journalists like that getting a chance to share their perspective on the ground, these European outlets in these countries where they have helped further this destruction by allowing Israel to continue, by partnering with the US and allowing Israel to wage this war. We see Deutsche Welle, and we see the BBC, Le Monde, some of these other outlets that have offered platforms to journalists over the last week. They were sharing these stories, and I think they need to be told alongside all the stories of what's happening to families with children that are dying. I also must share that in the past week, the death toll for journalists in Gaza is higher again because there were more killings There were more journalists that were killed in strikes by Israel. Tamer al-Zanin, a freelance photojournalist, was killed in an attack on July 21st. Wala al-Jabari, an editor, killed in a strike along with her husband, 4 children. She was pregnant. This happened on July 23rd. And on July 25th, Adam Abu Harbid, a journalist, killed in another strike, bringing the death toll to above 250 deaths easily of journalists. And all of the U.S. prestige media organizations that have shown over the last months they will do very little to speak out for journalists in Gaza should be ashamed, if there is any shame on their part, to be exhibited. If there is anything they can say right now that is of any value, I think the best they could do, if they finally do care about journalists and others in Gaza, is to speak about what Trump and his administration are doing and how they're continuing to wage this war and support it in the same manner and maybe even more aggressively than what Joe Biden and his administration. But I actually think it's pretty much the same, although his plan for annexation, Trump's plan, and then the way they would like to partition Gaza and push Palestinians into what essentially are concentration camps. Again, the open hostility and the warfare against journalists will continue. And I'm just thinking of all the opportunities up to now that media have had the ability to say to the world that this must end once and for all, to use the pages of newspapers, to use the airtime that they have during broadcasts, to use their websites, to put together videos, to use their live streams, to hold panel discussions. None of it has been enough. And if anything, they have downplayed the severity of what has been done to the Palestinian people, including its journalists, its doctors, all of its civil society members who have tried to help the people most impacted. And so one of the people who I identify as an example and an avatar for those in the U.S. prestige press, the group of people who hold themselves in high esteem as being part of this professional media class, is A.G. Sulzberger, the publisher of the New York Times. And A.G. Sulzberger delivered a speech back in May, it was May 20th, at a Kellogg Institute. It's part of the University of Notre Dame. And he was present there to give a speech about attacks on the free press. I'll play a clip for you, but you might notice as you listen that something was omitted.
A record number of journalists have been killed or jailed in recent years. Many more are subjected to campaigns of harassment, intimidation, surveillance, and censorship. Those efforts have been perhaps most obvious and intense in authoritarian states like China and Russia. But a more insidious playbook for undermining the press has emerged in places like Hungary and India, places where democracy persists, but in a more conditional way, under leaders who were elected legitimately and then set about undermining checks on their power. The experience in those eroding democracies offers sobering lessons in how attacks on journalists are often precursors to attacks on a broader suite of democratic institutions, rights, and norms, such as free expression, fair competition, and the even-handed administration of justice.
That was A.G. Sulzberger, the publisher of the New York Times, and at no point as he offers his assessment of the world does he speak about the Israeli government. That's probably deliberate. In fact, in the article that I wrote about media silence, I looked at the fine analysis done by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, or FAIR, a media criticism group that documents the way in which the media covers issues, broad range of issues. And they've spent several articles looking at how the Western press in the United States covers Gaza. And here with Sulzberger, he actually knows about the terrain globally, is taking examples of press freedom violations from the Committee to Protect Journalists, and he's omitting the extent to which the Israeli government is setting records when it comes to their responsibility for killing journalists, detaining, rounding up journalists, and so on and so forth. There's also the fact that Al Jazeera, the Arabic news network, is banned by Israel, and they passed a law, the kind of law that if passed in Russia, there would be monthly articles about its effect and what it was doing to foreign media. International press in Israel now face a law that was used to ban Al Jazeera under the auspices of protecting national security that can be enforced at any moment to shut down the work of those international media organizations or the journalists who are working there, who are based there and working on behalf of those international media organizations. In other words, they could be removed, they can be arrested if they are deemed to pose some kind of a threat to national security. And that could just come from reporting accurately on what we see unfolding in Gaza at this hour. And it's unconscionable that there are people like Sulzberger and other editors of newspapers and organizations like CNN, etc., that are not doing more to raise the alarm, that are offering just the smallest of thumbnail broadcast reports about what we see. And I believe that if more of the images were shown, if there was more discussion of people like that AFP journalist and what they're going through, not only would you have broad support in the US for journalists, but you'd also have broad support for things like sanctions or other measures to force Israel and its government to end this once and for all and stop starving the population. Of course, there is a whole plan of ethnic cleansing, a word that FAIR looked at the various media organizations and found that that's off limits. You can't use that. Of course, you can't use the G word. And throughout this segment, I have every so often called it what it is, a genocide. And that is something that in the context of our freedom of expression has been discouraged within newspapers and obviously on television or on the radio. You're not supposed to use that word. And you have to be careful about how you throw that word around too online as you are posting videos and sharing articles, because the algorithms that push out your content are looking for certain words and suppressing content with those words that present the horrors in Gaza accurately. So thank you for tuning in to this broadcast. We face a moment where humanity is collectively failing 2.1 million people in Palestine, in Gaza, and those people are going to be dying in greater numbers over the next week or two because they don't have food or water and also because they do not have access to health care. And what has happened to their bodies in many ways, probably they've reached a point where it's not reversible. This is damage they will live with if they continue to live for the rest of their lives. And that's true for the journalists on the ground as well. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another show. Until then, thank you for watching the Dissenter Update.